Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to start out with Ms. Janelle. At my request, the Government Accountability Office issued 2 reports on low-income housing tax credit. Their report found there is a minimal federal oversight of the program and a lack of quality data. As a result, it was difficult to evaluate efficiency and effectiveness of the program. To address this, Government Accountability Office recommended designating HUD to assist IRS in oversight of the program and to collect project cost data. Would you support HUD being designated as a joint administrator of the program, and if not, what would you recommend to be done to increase federal oversight and ensure data collection necessary to evaluate the program?
Thank you for that question. I believe a lot of data is actually already collected, but it's collected, to your point, at the state level with the state housing finance agencies. There isn't a centralized funnel on all of it for the federal government to take a look at it. I would suggest continuing to work with those state agencies in partnership with them to be sure that those data points are collected at the federal level, either through the service and or through HUD. The data that HUD has collected, I think, has been effective. The National Council of State Housing Finance Agencies also has a series of best practices for state housing finance agencies to report data, and following those, I think, would also be an effective tool.
Okay. Mr. Calabria, you expressed concern that this tax credit is too focused on large multi-unit structures in urban areas. In my home state of Iowa, we have many small towns and rural communities that are sorely in need of housing. In fact, I don't know how many times I hear this when I'm going around my county meetings, particularly from employers that are looking for more employees, and housing is an impediment. How could the tax credit be improved to better serve the needs of suburban and rural communities?
A great question, Senators. And I mentioned about half of renters live in properties with under 5 units. So again, the average tax credit is about 40 units. So one option would, of course, be to set aside for a certain number of units. You could require that a third of tax credit volume, dollar volume, go to either units under 20 or 10. I mean, this is certainly something where you can look at where the touch point is. But I think ultimately, and again, I don't want to dismiss the efforts that housing finance agencies are taking, but I think at this point, having a set aside for smaller properties is appropriate.
Mr. Watson, one recommendation you made to increase available housing and lower costs was to shorten the cost recovery period for residential structures. Specifically, you expressed support for providing neutral cost recovery. Can you elaborate on what you mean and how it would work?
Thank you, Senator, for the question. So under neutral cost recovery, it effectively is emulating providing the full value of the depreciation deduction for those types of investments. Because right now, when you make that investment and you have this deduction against your income, because you have that big expense, you have to take that over 27 and a half years. And both because of inflation and because the value of a dollar is higher now than it would be in the future, the real value of those deductions is eroded. Of course, we solve this through in other types of investments by just allowing folks to immediately expense those investments, as was done with the bonus depreciation measures adopted in 2017. That's really hard to do with structures, just given how large they are. And there's concern about, for example, we tried this in the early 80s, and there were some distortions in the market. Neutral cost recovery is a way to get around that by just allowing for an adjustment to preserve the real value of those deductions without needing to expense them. And that would, of course, increase the incentive to invest and preserve the value of those deductions over time.
Mr. Calabria, although there are housing shortages across the country, it's clear that some state and localities are doing worse than others. Governments in states like Iowa have encouraged development in construction sector. One town like Pella, Iowa, has gained national recognition for private efforts to increase housing availability. However, other areas have gone the other direction and increased barriers to building or renovating homes. Federal programs do have an impact, but it is ultimately these local decisions that have the greatest effect. What should state and local governments do to ensure that our federal housing programs are intended and bring down the cost of housing? That's my,
Great question, Senator, and I think we should commend those states that are making progress. I think just this week, Washington State, for instance, made a change, or at least the Senate made a change to its environmental approval process for housing. Obviously, Minnesota has made a number of changes. There have been great examples of where states have been leaders, and I think many other states should follow those examples.
okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Senator Grassley. Senator Cantwell. Senator Johnson would be next.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.